and welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Alexandra Paul, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Dotsie Bausch. Hi, Dotsie.
Hello, hello.
So you were traveling recently, and I know a lot of people are very interested to know what it's like to travel across the country.
Yeah, I really missed my family. And, I just thought, okay, I will be extremely careful. Also knowing that I'm probably at more risk going to the grocery store than going to an airport because no one was there.
Oh, really? So it was really empty?
It was like the most luxurious travel experience I've ever had. You had the entire row, all 4 flights, like to the layover and then to Kentucky where they live. Hardly any people were in the airport, so you could, just take a walk. I took my dog with me. I brought Yodi. And
wow.
We had to do a lot of walking on the layover. The only thing was the layovers were quite long, right? Because there are less flights available. But the other thing that was kind of amazing is it just was a completely different experience in terms of interacting with other humans. Everyone was just so kind and helpful and gracious. And that's not a typical travel experience. The last time I traveled was late February to Florida where I was speaking. And I mean, it was just madness, rush, run over on top of each other, bust out everything when you sit down. Who cares who's sitting next to you or if they need room or what's happening? Just really not a thought about your fellow human. And this was it's really turned us into, I think, thinking about other humans that we share this planet with, because we are all in this together. And that's been a running theme throughout these couple months of going through this together. And you could just tell people felt that way. It was, go ahead, let me help you. Do you need anything? Let me get your bag down. You have a dog. I mean, I was like, I think honestly, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but my suggestion is if you're going to travel now, because when everything's, more people are going to start traveling, let's say July, August, but we're still going to have coronavirus.
Yeah.
So it's going to be more dangerous when there's more people. There were 10 people on my flight to Denver, about 12 on my flight from Denver to Louisville. Coming back, there was this teeny bit more, like 23 or something, I think. So, there's 165 seats on the plane. So
that's pretty amazing. I'm going to go see my mom, but I am going to drive because it's in Oregon, and so it's a 12-hour drive.
Right.
I might as well just drive. And I want to do that too early on when there's just fewer people out on the roads and stuff. But so it's interesting, isn't it? What I think is great is that our priorities have changed, and we realize that there are things that are more important than getting to our destination at the quickly, or our little problems are not as important as this overall arching. So there's a silver lining.
Yeah. And just being respectful and careful. Everyone was wearing gloves, and we were washing everything down, and mask the entire time, which made it difficult to drink water on the plane. I went to the bathroom to drink water because I just figured like that was.
Oh, you mean you were afraid people?
Well, I had to wear my mask, so you can't drink water with a mask on. So like if I would go walk to the bathroom, take my mask off and drink water in the airplane. I mean, it just
you're like a secret alcoholic, but it's just water.
It's like Evian. Because it's really important, right? That to be ultra careful, since I did make that decision to travel. But anyway,
you saw your family.
Yeah. My parents aren't being that careful. So anyway, it's a whole other conversation. I want to spank them, but they don't behave.
Oh my gosh. Yep. I have to. Me too. My mom. I have to stop her. She went to the grow by plants at the nursery, and all of us got up in arms, and then she got very indignant, and then it turned into a family fight. So we stopped talking about it. We decided, Mom, she's an adult. She can make her decisions. She is. Even though she's almost 84, she's a very sound mind. She says, I'm almost 84. I can make my own decisions.
That's a great argument, Mom. I like that.
Oh. Well, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, which is pretty much everyone's favorite topic, especially in the vegan community, which is cheese.
Yes, cheese. Gosh, I mean, just plant-based products in general during this period of time. I think COVID has done more for our movement, if you will, than any of the collectiveness of all of us could have ever done, moving forward, which is extraordinary in that regard. It's not extraordinary that this virus is out there, but what it's done. And in the first quarter of 2020, plant-based product sales were up 11% in just the first quarter in comparison to all of 2019.
Wow. And in 2019, cheese sales were up 43% over the year before.
Right. And our guests might be able to tell us specifically cheese. This is the whole category of plant-based products. But yeah, it's mind-blowing what's starting to unfold in this space.
We have somebody who can really talk to us about this space. It's Michael Schwarz, who is a former attorney and the founder of Treeline Cheese, which is one of the first cheeses in the market, in the general marketplace around the country and around the world, because Treeline started back in 2012. So we're very excited to welcome Michael to our show today. And sorry we can't be eating all cheese together in the same room,
right.
But we'll have to do that later. Michael, welcome to Switch for Good.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me. It's a privilege to be on.
And Michael, the very first cheese that I was able to introduce my parents to, who you just heard live in Kentucky, was Treeline Cheese, because it was the first plant-based cheese, period, that Whole Foods got in stock in Louisville, Kentucky. So I made a massive platter, and fruits and all the cheeses. I think you had 3 at the time of the line, and they were like.
And now they're vegan. So there you go.
They are. And they're like, is this really? Are you
Wow,
sure? Like, yes, I'm sure. Eat it. Yeah. And
when you say that, it makes it all worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear a story like that, I go, that's why I started the company. And I feel, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it.
We're big fans.
I actually, and then we want to go back to your beginning, but I actually read this great quote of yours when someone asked about your legacy, and you said, "I would like to be remembered for the delicious flavors and textures of Treeline, and at the same time for all the cows and the calves who were spared from suffering because of them, for the streams and rivers and air that would be cleaner, and for the people who would be healthier." I just thought that was so beautiful.
I don't remember that, but it's quite good now that I hear.
I'm glad she reminded you of what you said. Yes, you should use that more often.
So tell us.
I need to write that down.
We'll cut and paste and send it to you.
So you grew up in South Africa, and you have a very interesting history. Tell us a little bit about your family and how that connects with who you are today.
Okay, well, I won't tell you what I would tell a therapist, because the question seems directed that way.
Well, Dotsie likes to go deep, so you know what? We're here for you.
Okay, so my parents were pretty amazing people, because they probably in the 1940s made a real commitment to something they believed in, which was trying to end apartheid. And when I grew up, there was racism was basically part of South African society, and it was considered the norm. And people didn't really see how kind of absurd it was. And I grew up with this.
The white people didn't see how absurd it was.
Of course. Well, strangely enough, I've had conversations with black people, and it's a really kind of a disturbing phenomenon that there was a certain amount of acceptance of it as, well, that's just how it is. And so that's, I think that's what's so insidious about these things, is that they even become the norm for the victim.
It's
right?
so true.
So what I think I got out of that experience, which obviously was not a healthy way to live, but I got the belief that just because other people are doing things doesn't mean you have to do them, and that doesn't make it right. Something's right or it's wrong, and you should have your own sense of right and wrong, which is not based on what other people are doing or what's prevailing. And I think if I look at it through that lens, being vegan and really taking the side of animals becomes easier in the sense that you go, well, look, it's just right. And I don't really care that the other people at dinner are having sides of beef or foie gras or whatever, because I need to do the right thing. I can't succumb to that kind of group think. Mm-hmm. So I think that really did shape my thinking as an adult.
Your father was a politician who, like you said, was opposed to apartheid, and he was on the defense team for Nelson Mandela. Do I have that right?
Very close. He defended one of the co-defendants in the trial. So they were involved in the coordinating the whole defense. But Nelson Mandela was not his client. Maybe he should have been, because my father's client was acquitted and did not go to jail. So,
oh my gosh, what was that like for you as a young man growing up during that period of time, during that trial, and during your father's client getting acquitted and then Nelson Mandela going to prison?
Okay, well, I was too young to have any experience of that, of the actual trial. But it's always difficult for kids to grow up feeling different. And, as people who were, Jewish in South Africa, we were a small minority, and also very opposed to apartheid, I did feel different. And it's never easy for a kid to grow up with that kind of feeling. There was also a pretty repressive government. So when I got older and I was at university, it became quite clear that the family was under surveillance most of the time. And this happened with my older brothers. They had the same experience. And as a result, it was very hard to trust people easily. It took time to trust people because of the fact that we were always on the other side. We were always the people saying, no, that's wrong. And therefore we were ostracized.
How did you know you were under surveillance?
So firstly, in South Africa back in the 70s, having a telephone was kind of a big deal. It was quite hard to get a phone, and getting a repair on a phone was almost, took weeks and if not months. So if your phone stopped working, you'd call up for service, and the phone system was run by the government. The whole phone system was owned by the government and operated by the government. So, if you called for service, it would be weeks and months before you got the phone going. And one day on a weekend, this guy showed up at our house and he said, I've come to rewire your phones.
How convenient.
Wow.
We were just going, well, why? And he goes, no, we got a work order here to rewire your phones. And they spent the whole day rewiring our phones. So, it was pretty obvious what was going on.
Yeah.
And we never had any private conversations on the telephone when I was a kid. Never, ever.
This must have definitely given you, because of the influence of your parents and what you went through, it must have given you just a lot of courage in the face of opposition, and paved the way for you to do something like become vegetarian and then vegan, since you were comfortable with being outside normal cultural values.
I think that's right. I'm still uncomfortable. I'm still comfortable being outside normal cultural values, but I wouldn't say I got courage, because I just think when you've got a kind of a conviction that something's right, it's impossible not to live that life. And one of my friends who I spend a lot of time with and who loves eating out said to me, I so admire your willpower. You never eat meat or dairy when we go out. And I said, no, it would take willpower for me to eat it.
Yes.
For me to actually bring myself to eat that, it's unthinkable that I would do that. So to me, I don't think it's courage. It's just how I am. I don't know. It's just
What was it that actually? What was what influenced you to change like this, to go from an omnivore diet, which I imagine you grew up your childhood eating meat and dairy? Why did you change?
So, I grew up really loving animals. We had dogs in the house. We had a garden, and often we'd find birds that fell out of a tree, and we'd take care of them and nurture them. And our house was a place where anyone with a hard luck story got some care. Whether it was an animal or a person, or there was always somebody getting some help of some kind. And then years later, when I was living in Texas, in Dallas, I just taken the bar exam, and I was spending a lot of time on my own because I just moved to a new city. And I just started thinking, what's really important in life? And I puzzled over this for a while. And then I said, what's important is what your effect is on the world. It seems to me that your effect on the world is like an imprint of imagine a seal imprinting on wax. That's the effect of that seal or the stamp. And then I said to myself, well, you want to imprint your values, and if you don't live according to your values, you're not imprinting them. You're not having any effect. So your values have no meaning. You're living a lie. So you can say, well, I care about animals, or I am compassionate, but you're not living that. So it's empty. It's basically, I said to myself, you're living a lie if you don't do something about it. And then I just said, well, then you got to stop eating meat. It's that simple. And I just stopped. And at that point, I made a conscious decision to continue to eat dairy because I believed wrongly that dairy was not inherently bad because they didn't kill the animals. Well, it took me a while, but I finally understood that that's just not true. And if anything, dairy is worse than meat.
Mm-hmm. Was there a connection that you made between the othering and then?
Sorry, here's Boris.
Boris, the big manly cat, making an appearance.
I'll try and keep him from misbehaving, but he does his own thing.
It's all good.
That's all right. Anyone who wants to see Boris, just look at our YouTube version of this episode. He's a big, beautiful cat.
I was wondering if you made a connection when you looked at animals and what they endure and what they go through to the othering and the racism that was alive and inherent in the culture in South Africa that you grew up in. Were you making that connection as you were traveling along, deciding to take animals off your plate?
Yes, definitely. I think you put it exactly right. It's othering. It's this sort of idea that there are others on the planet who are not as worthy as we are. Mm-hmm. And, I have to really reject that kind of thinking. In South Africa, there was this kind of belief that black people were there to serve white people. Mm-hmm. And there's also a belief among some people that animals are just there for our convenience and our pleasure. And I just can't really accept that. And I think the reason why I can't accept it is I couldn't accept in South Africa that I couldn't accept this kind of myth that we were brought up with, that the misfortune of being born with a certain skin color meant you were unworthy. that just didn't work for me.
Your parents must have, they came from Germany, and so they had some experience with the Holocaust. I would think that their age would give them some experience. Did that also color being Jewish in the 50s and 60s? Did that also affect you from your parents?
Okay, so my mother was born in South Africa, but my father was born in Germany and left as a child in the 1930s. Mm. So he escaped the Holocaust. But I think the Holocaust is something that has had a multi-generational effect. It has different effects on different people, but it profoundly affects most Jews, in my opinion. Some people see it as a complete abandonment of right and wrong. People say, well, there's no right and wrong. What happened is so horrific and people never really paid the full price for it, that I can then do anything I want because there's never going to be a price to be paid. Other people see it as a kind of a lesson in what can go wrong when people lose their empathy and when they get that otherness, because it was that led to the Holocaust, because the Nazis said Jews are different. Jews are not worthy. In the same way as apartheid South Africa said blacks are not worthy. And I think the next step up in sort of consciousness is looking at the planet and all its inhabitants as a whole and saying, well, who's to say who's worthy and who isn't? You know, even an insect is worthy.
Super worthy. I always say that in the web of life, if you just lopped off humans, we're actually the least worthy. The whole planet would do very well without us, but without insects, the planet would be in big trouble, right? So, it's speciesism, racism. Dotsie and I talk a lot about that and how a plant-based diet actually fights both of those, especially when it comes to dairy. And so I'm interested in the story that brought you from being an ethical vegan to being an ethical entrepreneur with a vegan company.
With an intellectual property attorney stop there in the middle. He's multi-talented, multifaceted.
Yeah. So I practiced law for quite a long time, and at a certain point I felt that I was losing my passion for it, and I said to myself, would you want to go to a lawyer who's lost his passion? And I said, well, obviously not. And then I said, I've got to find something more appropriate for me. And I looked around at different things, and I just came to the conclusion that I should invest time and money in something that really followed my values. And I'm a firm believer that if veganism is to succeed, it has to succeed on the same terms as other businesses. So we have to be able to stand up to the competition of dairy and of other products. And I see business as a real force of positive change, because if you consider how did McDonald's become so popular? Well, it became popular because people went and bought burgers, and it's now tremendously powerful and has a huge influence on the food supply chain. It has sociological influence. It has an influence on people's health, has an influence on the planet. And I think vegan businesses can do the same, except not be as destructive, not be damaging the planet the way meat and dairy do. You know, producing products that are healthy for people. And I think it's very empowering to do it through business rather than just through protest or activism. I think there's an important place for protest and activism, and I've done a fair amount of that, but ultimately business is what drives things in a deep, meaningful way.
I've always been really impressed with, it doesn't seem like you are at Treeline trying to compete with cow's milk cheese, dairy cheese. Like you're not trying to color the packaging to look like it. You're not trying to have the same experience that it'll be more like dairy cheese. Talk to us about the thinking behind that strategy of not being the same as dairy cheese, which is what people are used to, and what a lot of people think that they want to have is that same experience. But for those of us that have gone down the rabbit hole, it's really quite the opposite. It's just enjoying food and flavors and textures and interesting new aspects. And that's what you're creating at Treeline.
Yeah, well, I've tried to do that, and I've tried to have products that are good in their own right, so that you don't have to say, well, this is good for a vegan cheese, this is good. Mm-hmm. I want it to be good no matter what. But ultimately, you're always imitating dairy in some way. So, you know, our soft cheeses imitate certain French soft cheeses. And we will be bringing out some slices and shreds in the next 6 to 9 months, which will be sort of positioned to compete with dairy. But I think that there's a big danger with trying to make a product that's, sorry, my cat's now wants to play.
No apologies.
Cats.
We're learning here.
of making a claim that something is a equivalent to a dairy cheese. So, for example, if you take something like brie, they've been making brie in France for hundreds of years. If you offer a French person your vegan brie, you're almost certainly going to come up short and disappoint that person. So instead, we say, this is a cashew cheese. Try it. And then it becomes something different and something to be more adventurous with.
You also proudly proclaim that you're vegan and don't go so much with the plant-based moniker. Whereas a lot of companies will stay with plant-based because they're afraid of alienating people with the word vegan. Tell us a little bit about, you call yourself vegan too, I understand. Tell us about what you were thinking in terms of that, in terms of marketing, or was it just purely you felt like as ethically you needed to stick with your own definition of who you are?
This is a subject for debate. We are now, we're about to do a complete rebrand of our product, and we are going to be calling it plant-based, but we'll also call out pretty clearly on the packaging that it's vegan. I think personally that the term vegan is now becoming a mark of quality, in that people see something that's vegan and they think, this is probably good. It's probably good for me. It used to be that vegan meant, well, this is going to taste like sawdust and it's going to be horrible. And that's not true anymore. So I think that's changing. And I've never felt one should shy away from expressing one's convictions.
Yeah. You stand by that, it seems to me, in everything you do at Treeline. And your mission prioritizes animals and the environment, but also humans. So tell me if we have this correct. You specifically use cashews from Brazil as opposed to other countries because it's harvested by machines, whereas in India and Vietnam, Thailand, they're usually harvested by hand by children. And then the shell is also very hard and the acidity can irritate people's hands, but it's, child labor that they're using. How did you decide to take this stance? Walk us through the journey of, how you decided what to use in the cheeses. I also want to get into the science a little bit later about the Acidophilus, because that's my favorite part of Treeline is that tang. But I want to understand first just your ethics behind Treeline as it relates to human beings.
Okay. So this issue with cashew nuts is really the processing, not the harvesting. Okay. It's when they have to take the nut out of the shell. There's a kind of a tar surrounding it, and that's very hard on people's hands. I think there is some child labor in Vietnam and India, but I think it's not as bad as it has been.
That's good.
But Brazil, it's machine processed rather than hand processed. And the reason why that's important is this tar is really pretty destructive. And you can see on YouTube, there are videos of people who've worked in this industry for a while, and their hands are just permanently disfigured by the stuff, and it burns their skin. It's really not nice. But to answer your question, I just think that if you're going to be compassionate, you got to be compassionate across the board. And for a vegan company to support something that's really not good for people, to me, it just seems very hypocritical. And I don't want anyone to say I care about cows more than I care about people, because I believe everyone's entitled to be treated fairly, whether you're cow or human or insect or, anything. You're entitled to fair treatment.
I have a question, just going back a little bit, is why did you pick cheese as your way of getting, spreading, doing good through business. Was there a personal decision there?
Yeah, so I really used to eat a lot of really good cheese. When I was a lawyer, I used to go to France and Italy a lot to see clients, and we'd always have this amazing cheese cart after dinner. And I acquired a taste for
Hi, Boris.
really
Giving
good
Daddy
cheese.
a kiss.
And I also think it's become a bit of a cliche, but people say, well, I could be vegan except I can't give up cheese. Mm-hmm. So I felt like a big contribution would be to make vegan cheese, and then it's something that I really always enjoyed. So come on, Boris.
He's into this conversation.
Well, it is a big contribution on so many levels. And Dotsie, who is the founder of Switch for Good, the nonprofit, specifically you focus on dairy. So so many people must tell you firsthand how they can't give up.
Cheese. I mean, it's what you hear quite often and more than anything else in the dairy category, most definitely. And we know why from the case of morphine, and people are truly addicted to it. But
and the salt and the fat, which
in addition to that, yes.
And speaking of actually ingredients in cheese and your cheese is that it has all the robust flavor, and of course it has fat because it's made from nuts, but you have very few ingredients, which is good because there are very few additives also in your cheeses.
Yeah, I try to keep the label as clean as possible, and that's not always easy because the way food is sold and distributed in the United States and Europe as well means that it's transported over very long distances, and it spends a lot of time either in a warehouse or on a shelf somewhere. So it has to be able to last, and it's very difficult to make a long-lasting product without putting various additives in it. So far, we've been really successful in keeping those to an absolute minimum, but I do take pride in a very clean ingredient list.
Let's go a little bit into the food science and the food science behind cashews and fermenting cashews with probiotic Acidophilus. Take us through, let's pretend like we're Alexandra and I are in food science kindergarten. Because I think maybe most of our listeners are, comparison to you anyway, and all that you know. What are the steps and the stages, and how did you know that you wanted Treeline to end up tasting like it does with that like awesome tangy bite that I just absolutely love to pair with a delicious Pinot, either Gris or Pinot Noir, depending on the cheese.
So firstly, I'm not a food scientist. I have a degree in electrical engineering and a law degree. And I just, honestly, I muddled my way through this. I experimented and tried different things until I got something that I personally liked. And I wish I could tell you that I sat down and drew on like a PhD in food science, but I really didn't. I got a book out of the library on how to make cheese. That was it.
Really? Well, I think that's actually even a better story because that gives more inspiration to our listeners.
That you can do anything you set your mind to.
But you use Acidophilus, which is a healthy probiotic, to ferment your cheese. Are there different? I don't know much.
Take us through that process, because I'm sure by now food scientists do work at Treeline. I'm assuming.
We have one, yes.
Okay, all right.
And we have some consultants. So it's really it's complex because it's nature, but it's also quite simple. And that is that we take the cashews and the various ingredients, and we also add in this bacteria. And it's called, one name for it is the lactic acid bacteria. And what that means is the bacteria starts to act on the sugars in the other ingredients, and it then produces lactic acid, which gives that tanginess. And lactic acid is very common in all kinds of fermentation. It's like sauerkraut and things like that are made by lactic fermentation. A lot of vegans think that the word lactic means there's milk in it. That isn't the case. We get a lot of people emailing saying, quite outraged, how could you call yourself vegan? You're using lactic acid bacteria. And we have to explain, well, that's not really how it works. And yeah, so it's really quite simple. And it's just the trick really is controlling that and making sure you can get the right flavor profile by combining your ingredients and using the right kind of processing to get that flavor.
Does it take a long time to develop a new flavor? Do you have the base now? Because you use cashews as your base. And do you get to taste them all? At every step of the way? Or how does that work? Because I'd be there for the taste testing.
Yeah.
I'm not that involved in the actual production anymore. I used to be, but I'm not. But so we do have a base, and we have extended that base to other things. So, for example, we now have cream cheeses, and we're just about to release our plain chive and onion and strawberry cream cheeses, and those are made in a similar way to the French-style cheeses that people are more familiar with. And I think your question was, does it take a long time? It does, because you make a little change, and then it takes time to culture, and then you've got to see how it acts over a period of time before you know that you've got it right. Mm-hmm. And that's particularly hard when you're dealing with aged cheeses, which have to age longer than just a few days, because you make a change and then you've got to wait a few days to see any kind of result. And if you're impatient like I am, that's quite a challenge.
So when I was doing research for this show, I realized I didn't know, I eat cashews and I really like cashews, but I didn't know much about cashews. And everyone says, oh, cashew's not a nut, it's a fruit. And I realized how little I knew about cashews. So I looked at some pictures, because I also had never seen a cashew. Have you, Dotsie, seen a picture
like inside the shell?
No, a cashew tree or bush. I think it's a tree. It's a tree because actually Brazil has the largest cashew tree in the world, and it covers something like several acres. It's amazing. The canopy covers.
Gosh, I haven't seen them.
Tell us about cashews and why you chose cashews as your base, because they are fruit and they're a beautiful plant. So, but the cashew, well, anyway, we'll have Michael explain more about the cashews.
Okay, so cashews are, I think, ideal for this type of product because it's possible to grind them up really fine. So you can get a very nice, smooth texture. And secondly, they have a good amount of fat in them, and fat's necessary for cheese. Now, it's mostly good fat. It's unsaturated fat. Okay, and then finally, cashews have a very mild flavor. They don't have a strong flavor, so you can ferment them and you're not competing with the flavor that the nut has. So, for example, peanuts have a really distinctive flavor. I don't think you would make a very good cheese out of peanuts because they have that intense flavor. And then the actual plant, it is beautiful. The fruit looks like a bell pepper, and then the nut kind of hangs underneath it. It's looks like it comes from another planet. It's really quite weird, but I think it's beautiful.
And the fruit, people don't eat the fruit. They just eat the seed of the fruit. Is that right?
No, in Brazil and many countries where cashews grow, they actually make a juice out of the fruit. They press it.
Mm. So tell us about the saturated fat, non-saturated fat.
New line of slices and shreds is a big departure from what other vegan cheese companies have been doing, in that we are not using coconut oil at all. There's several reasons for this, which we can talk about, but from a human health point of view, I'm one of these people who believes that saturated fat is not really good for you. And what I'm seeing, and I don't want to disparage my competitors, but what I'm seeing with vegan cheese is quite a disturbing trend towards very high saturated fats.
It's true.
And we made a conscious decision that we were going to try and avoid that. And we aren't going to be using coconut oil at all. So, I mean, I'm really excited about that because it's a big departure from what other vegan cheese makers are doing.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk about what you are using instead?
Yeah, we're using sunflower oil.
All right, so educate us on the difference, because I don't know. Do you know?
Just that it has less saturated fat than coconut oil.
But how much? And what's the...
A very significant amount.
Okay.
A typical slice of vegan cheese today has about 25% of your saturated fat allowance. So that's one slice is 25%. Ours is going to have 5%.
And normal cheese? Oh, shoot. I shouldn't say normal
Alexandra,
cheese. I know.
What show are you on? Where are you?
That other cheese, the cow cheese, that has more saturated fat than 25%. Is that correct?
Yeah, bad. And it's also, I'm not sure it's more saturated fat, but it's got cholesterol, which is really, that's not something you need at all.
So in terms of selling the cheeses, I don't know a ton about selling food, really any kind of food. And it doesn't seem like you did either when you started Treeline. What most surprised you about the business of selling and distributing food, and what did you learn that was most surprising?
Well, I've been threatening to write a book about this because it's actually it's more than surprising. I think if Americans knew exactly what was going into their food, how much they were paying for it, and how inefficient the system is, how much waste there is, they would be shocked. Consumers want to pay as little as possible for everything. And that pressure, that puts pressure on the retailers because they have to keep their margins as low as possible. And the more powerful the retailers are, the more they push costs down the chain. And so this desire for the low price really pressurizes every piece of the food supply chain. And as is the case with anything, when you put weight on the top, the guy on the bottom feels the pain the most, right? And unfortunately, the way things are set up in our system is that startups and small companies have the most burden shifted onto them through this, and they're the least able to withstand it. And that's one of the reasons why it's very hard to do a food startup, and also why food in America is so much a big industry. It's just really, really hard to do it if you're a small player.
Talk to me about getting shelf space. My husband was in the drink category, specifically at Monster Energy, actually, for some years. And I learned more about shelf space than I ever really thought I wanted to know about. But it seems to me from the education that I had from him on this topic that is the biggest challenge of what you're just talking about in terms of being a small company. It's such a fight to be able to get in anywhere and get in anywhere on the shelf that people would actually see your product. So like not on the very bottom that's down by people's ankles.
Yeah.
What's that competition like, and how did you guys get in to some of the big box retailers?
Well, I think we've been really lucky because a lot of the retailers are recognizing that they need vegan products. So they have made accommodations for us. And I think one of the leaders in this has been Whole Foods because they are very good about letting small companies in. And I have to really give credit to Whole Foods, even though a lot of people love to hate Whole Foods. A lot of small companies would never have got to start without them, in my opinion. And then, the saying goes that retail is really a real estate business. Mm-hmm. And the value of every square inch of a store is driven by how much product can be moved in that square inch. So it's always better to move stuff that costs the least and sells for the highest price, which is unfortunately creates a kind of a mediocrity in our stores, in my opinion. But I think that's changing because consumers really want certain things, and the stores are responsive to that. They know that they've got to give what they want. But that does make it hard for small companies.
How has this coronavirus affected your business and vegan food in general on the shelves?
So it actually has not had a good effect because, as I understand it, and eventually the dust will clear on this whole thing and we'll know exactly what happened and why. But my understanding is that when the pandemic started, people ran out and bought staples like bleach and toilet paper and baked beans, and the shelves were just depleted of all of those things. So the stores had to really scramble to catch up and keep those things stocked. And that goes to my point about you make money by the things that really move quickly. Mm-hmm. And so they, if I understand this correctly, they were really struggling to keep that kind of stuff stocked and therefore had to basically pull back on some of the more esoteric products, because people were running in going, I need toilet paper. They weren't running in going, I need vegan cheese. You know, some were saying that.
Some of us were.
That's right.
And so I think there's been a bit of a sort of a lull because of it. And it has an effect all the way down the supply chain, because if the store doesn't order, then the distributor doesn't order from us. And so it has caused a bit of a decline. Plus, I think a lot of the stores were struggling because they didn't want to put their shelf stocking people in danger. So they had to stock shelves at night, and there just wasn't enough time to get everything on the shelf in a lot of cases. Some stores have restricted the number of people that can come in. So it hasn't had a great effect on us, and we've really taken a bit of a knock in the past month. But where we have seen a huge growth is online, and also we supply Purple Carrot, the meal kit service, and that's skyrocketed.
What's the future look like besides shreds and cheese, which again I'm very excited about? But besides maybe the product line, like what is the future of vegan cheese and Treeline specifically that you see in the next 5 years and you're excited to share?
I think the future is really, really bright, and I think it's bright. Just looking at our company, we've got a new CEO who's a really experienced food professional. We built a new sales team, and we've basically got sales people from the dairy industry who are now switching to selling vegan products. And I see that as, that kind of tells a story that our head of sales is a former dairy guy. I think in our product lineup, well, I'm really excited about the cream cheeses. I think that those are going to sell well. People are really going to like them. They're very pure. They don't have all kinds of weird stuff in them. I'm excited about the slices and shreds because of, the health aspects. We're going to produce something that tastes really good and is really good for you. And then the market in general, I just think it's going to follow the model that the plant-based meat market has followed. And I believe that people will go through a very similar evolution to what I went through, in that it's almost like the plant-based meat is the gateway drug to real veganism. And people will say, well, I can give up meat. And then the next step is going to be, well, wait a second, meat and dairy are really one and the same thing.
Most people in the 70s, 80s, 90s, they gave up, even 2000s, they gave up meat first, like all the three of us did. And then we gave up dairy after our minds and our hearts were open and our eyes were opened. But I think people are going to start giving up dairy even.
That's a journey that I was not expecting for people to go on. When we started Switch for Good, so many people are giving up dairy because it's making them sick and making them feel terrible. Not only from a lactose intolerance perspective, a dairy allergy perspective, an inflammation perspective, a breathing perspective. The list goes on. And very soon after they give up dairy, they start to ask questions about wait, why is this a dead animal on my plate? Which traditionally speaking, that hasn't necessarily been the case when you flip it, like us, right? We gave up meat and Michael too, and had to take that journey. So that's exciting to see, because the flip is quicker when you give up dairy first. I
also think it vindicates a lot of the people that started these businesses, like myself, like Miyoko. It just shows that if you give people really good vegan cheese, they will actually buy it, and then change happens in society just off your plate. I think that's really a very optimistic and empowering thought, that change can happen just because of people's relationship with what they eat.
That is so well said.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for being on our show and sharing your story and your ethics and values, which have really you have had a ripple effect, by the way, and made that imprint that you talked about earlier in the show just so deeply around the world with your cheeses. So thank you.
Thank you for being who you are.
It's always nice to get that feedback, and I really do appreciate you saying that.
All right, so we've got about 6 months before shreds and slices. I'm just going to start my countdown.
We're working hard. It's coming.
All right, ping us and let us know when it's ready. I'm going to fly to the store. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.